We're happy to see everybody here. And we'll be getting, Will is going to be back, he said, in basically a couple of minutes.
Yeah, but I think in the meantime, we could probably introduce the first topic and
Sure. Why don't we do that?
And at the point in which we are ready to have audience participation, Will can give his speech.
Absolutely, that's great. So I'm going to take the agenda down, and you guys do that. And whenever we're ready to move to the public portion of the meeting,
yeah,
I'll give my speech.
Craig, why don't you introduce the first session here?
Sure. So, good evening, everyone. Number one on our agenda tonight is a continued discussion of residential parking permits. And in light of the conversations that we've had previously, where there's definitely some interest among the community, and also given the discussions that the Congestion Pricing Task Force has had in regards to some of the interest in having potential residential parking programs in place to help mitigate some of the concerns that they have raised regarding some of the possibilities that there could be vehicles that are looking to park just short of where the 60th Street toll zone boundary is. We thought it would be helpful to try to get some other perspectives from cities that have already implemented such programs. So I am very grateful to have on board here presenting tonight Raynell Cooper from the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Authority, also known as MUNI. So they are sort of similar to our MTA, and they actually have it. But I'm not sure, maybe Raynell can help describe what their mission is. But they also have some DOT type of elements as well, including a streets division in which they have a number of policy professionals, including Raynell, who work on things such as residential parking policy, curb management, and all sorts of things that we typically talk about here. So I reached out, and Raynell was gracious enough to offer to provide some information regarding San Francisco's residential parking program. And I asked him to just provide us with an overview and a candid assessment of it. So I'm going to just ask Will, if you could unmute Raynell. And just from a housekeeping perspective, Raynell's going to give his presentation, and then we are going to entertain questions, first from the public, then from the Community Board 8 board members. And then we're going to request, just in consideration of Raynell's time, it is 3:30 and he is in San Francisco and he is on the clock working. So he's graciously giving us some of his time from work. So we want to just make sure that we're focusing on questions rather than comments. And when we are when we've completed any of the questions that come up about, we then could either roll into some comments if people want to discuss further residential parking, or depending on what time it is, we want to be able to move the agenda and make sure that we have New York City Transit be able to present their agenda items, because I know there are definitely people here who want to participate in that discussion, and we also want to be conscientious of the time that that New York City Transit staff is providing us at this late hour. So I guess without further ado, Raynell, are you unmuted? And
yeah, thank you. Right. Yeah, thank you for the introduction.
And feel free to show your screen whenever you're ready.
Great, let me do that. Great, I'll go full screen. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Raynell Cooper. I manage residential parking policy at the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. We are kind of a unique agency on a national scale, because we have our streets division, as Craig mentioned, but we also run our transit system, MUNI. We're one of the few cities that has transit and streets kind of in the same agency, one agency connected. And I've been with the agency for about 5.5 years, all of that working on our residential parking permit program, which I will get into. And yeah, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation. Always love talking about this stuff with other cities. So I'll just quick agendas, just do an overview of what residential permit parking is, and then various aspects of it, experiences that I've had in San Francisco, and then perhaps some suggestions and just thoughts on what next steps could look like for New York City and for Manhattan and the Upper East Side in particular. Big disclaimer up front, want to get this out of the way, that I do not speak for any of the New York agencies that may be looking at this. I don't have any knowledge of the specifics of any proposals beyond what has been discussed publicly. And San Francisco, New York, very different places, distinct land use patterns, transportation histories, political cultures, etc. I'll attempt to bridge the knowledge where I can, but there will obviously be limitations there. Besides a few trips to the Met, I have not spent that much time on the Upper East Side, so excuse my my lack of deep knowledge on what may be going on in your area. So what is residential permit parking? I'm going to continue to call it RPP just because that's what we call it in San Francisco. But other cities have different names for it: preferential parking, zone parking. I'm sure that if it comes to pass in New York, you'll come up with some other name, other name for it. It seems like New York City has its own language when it comes to transportation. But how I see it, how I define it, is basically some system, a system of parking regulation that confers some sort of parking privilege to some subset of drivers with a connection to the area. And I focus on, I bolded those two statements there because I think that's the crux of what makes these programs somewhat flexible, but that's also where a lot of the discussion can come around in terms of how a program can look and can really change, the effect that the program has on the city and on drivers, both residents and non-residents in the area. There we go. So just make sure this that great. So some cities with RPP, not to say obviously that if we're all, not everybody's doing the right thing necessarily, but New York is more or less on its own in terms of major cities and not having some form of residential permit parking. Most of the other kind of big dense cities in America have some sort of permit parking program in some parts of the city. And this is true of also a lot of our not as dense cities like Phoenix and San Antonio. The other cities in the New York City metro area have it: Jersey City, White Plains, Stamford, just a few examples. And most major cities in Europe will have near their downtowns and their sort of more dense urban cores will have a system of paid parking for visitors or time limited parking for visitors, and then have residents free, like we see in the sign from Germany on the bottom right. So a lot of different ways to make a permit program. I'm going to talk about the permit regulations, but then also the costs, and then the regulations on the street. A lot of questions about who can buy a permit. So most programs, it starts with the residents. It's a permit program for residents, but some cities offer permits to teachers, some to business owners, and firefighters, delivery vehicles for businesses within an RPP area. And some cities don't do any of that. Some cities are pretty strict with keeping it to residents with some sort of guest or visitor permit system. So the question that a new system would have to think about is who has the power to modify those areas and rules. Usually it's a transportation department, but sometimes it falls to public works or police department. How many permits can a household or a business get? That is also a really key question in terms of how to make a program work. Are the permits capped either by the household or by the building or by the area? In San Francisco, we have we have household caps. We don't have any sort of area-wide caps. How are the permit areas set? And I'll show you a map in a little bit of what San Francisco's program looks like, but it's the way these usually work is that there's a zone A, a B, C, etc. Those will all have to have boundaries, with the caveat that you don't want to have boundaries that are too big because you don't want people to be commuting within that zone. But you also don't want to have areas be too small where one person having a birthday party can take up all the parking in an area. And you also wanted to figure out how the boundaries between areas work, because that's an area of tension if someone lives right on a boundary and can only park in one direction from their home as opposed to another direction. Another question is how to handle new development. There's a lot of cities that will specifically exclude new development. In California, that's something that under state law is not really allowed, and that's not something we do in San Francisco, but something to consider as well. Permit cost structure. There's a whole different, range of ways to do it. You can have free permits. I do not suggest having free permits, but Boston is perhaps the most notable example of a city that has free residential parking permits for residents. You can have a sort of a nominal fee that covers some of the costs of the program. You can do the full kind of cost recovery system where you calculate all of the costs of the program, and then you divide that by the number of permits you think you're going to sell, and then that's how you set the rate. You could set some sort of market rate. You could do this. You could set this via an auction. You can set this via something based on the rate of off-street parking. This is super uncommon. Vancouver is a city that does something kind of approaching a market rate system for some of their permits, but not super common yet in America. And you could vary the cost of the permits, whether it be by the number of permits, access to parking. You could also have like a low income discount, something like that. In Toronto, they vary their permits very wildly based on the access to parking that somebody has. So a permit is, I don't know the exact numbers, but a permit's actually relatively cheap if you don't have parking. But if you do have parking, it becomes very expensive because that's seen as like a convenience sort of permit. That's also very difficult to run because they literally have to go to every address within the RPP area to check on their parking availability. So in San Francisco, we use a cost recovery model. We just add up all the costs and then divide it by the number of permits, and that's how we get to our rate, which is $170 a year. But that's going up with inflation and a few other kind of changes, going up to about 190 or so next year, and then we may break 200 in 2 fiscal years. So the on-street regulations are the other side of it. So I always like to think of RPP as having 2 sides. You have the eligibility and who gets the permits, and then you have what kind of happens to everybody else. So in terms of limits for visitors, the kind of 3 main ways you could handle that are having just no visitor parking at all. And that's something that the picture on the top right is from Washington, D.C., where they have blocks that it's just permit parking only, no visitor parking, except for guest permits that residents can purchase for their guests, but people visiting the neighborhood otherwise can't park. You can do time limits. It's common, the most common of the ways to limit visitor parking in an area. So allows short-term visits, but doesn't allow for long-term commuter parking. And then paid parking, which is something that we're starting to roll out a little bit in San Francisco. It's something that's common in Europe, as I mentioned. And it's something that Portland, Seattle have a few instances of, a few other cities, but less common at this point. And then time of enforcement, you could do a 24/7. You can do it all day. You can also have overnight only, which is common in the Southern California suburbs. They'll make it so that only the residents can park on the street overnight. But during the day, it's open to whoever. You can also have working hours only, and then there's any sort of other options that you can imagine. We have some that are seasonal, based on near the baseball stadium. So when the Giants are playing, there's later hours for RPP than there are other times. You could also, Salem, Massachusetts is actually my favorite. They have a whole separate RPP program for October because their parking demand is so wildly different in October than it is other times of the year because of people coming to town for Halloween and witch-related things. So San Francisco, we mostly have the time limits, and we also have the paid parking. Our enforcement is, we have some that are all day, some that, as you can see in this picture, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday. Some go even later, but most are in the sort of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday kind of area. So program costs. So something to consider when creating a new program is what the costs are. These are the big categories for San Francisco. The biggest one is enforcement, labor of enforcement, and the vehicles and equipment associated with enforcing these time limits, and now meters a little bit here and there. The system itself, so how you're keeping track of who has the permit and how the front end, the back end, there's a whole treasury sort of accounting aspect of that you would hopefully be able to find some other city agency that already has something like that you'd be able to connect to, but maybe something that you would have to stand up from scratch. The planning staff, the people like the New York City equivalent of me and my colleagues, and then the signage and or meters, depending on exactly what sort of on-street regulation you have. So you have to have all the actual hard costs for those. But just like almost anything in government budgeting, labor is going to be the biggest cost. So just an overview of San Francisco's program. Sorry, it's a lot of text on the slide, but so our program was created in 1976. Actually, a lot of programs came in about that same time. It was this idea of reducing congestion and making the city more beautiful by taking away cars. And this was also a time of major expansion of our central business district to the north. The Transamerica Pyramid opened in the late 1960s, and that was just a few blocks from North Beach and Chinatown and other residential neighborhoods that were worried about commuters coming in and parking in the neighborhood. It was also around when BART, our regional transit system, was opened, which the tunnel from Oakland, from the East Bay, through the city, and then down through the southern parts of the city towards San Mateo County. And those there was concern about people driving to the BART stations and then getting on BART. So the program has since blossomed from there, has 32 areas, most of which are less than a square mile, sorry, the typo, covering about 75,000 parking spaces and about half of all households in San Francisco. We sell 60,000 permits a year of the annual permits, but we also have guest and visitor permits. We have resident, business, teacher, in-home childcare, and also healthcare providers, and also for firefighters whose fire station is within the districts. This is an important point. So for us, we have a very much a resident-driven program. We don't really go into a neighborhood and say, "Hey, it looks like you guys have a parking problem. We should try to do something about that." We wait to hear from the residents about that, and then kind of respond to their needs and desires, which we'll get into some of that, the benefits and the disadvantages of that system. And the program right now costs about $12.5 million a year, and that's recovered by annual $170 permit fee. One thing I don't mention on this slide is that most of the city, we have a 4 permit per household cap, but in some newer areas, we have a cap of 2 permits per household and then 1 for each driver. But unlike some other cities, we don't stagger the pricing. It's the flat price for each permit. So pros and cons, I'd say, from my 5.5 year experience, almost 6 year experience with this program. Pros is that RPP is generally popular amongst the people who use it. I think most people in most areas seem to think that it works well for them, and the system, a lot of the internal workings of the system seem to be working well. It reduces congestion definitely in some areas, so at least definitely in a lot of the more outlying areas, as well as some of the kind of mid-density areas in the center of our city. So this addition of paid parking, so instead of having a time limit for visitors, having paid parking, allows for a much more politically popular way for us to raise revenue, because we're just one agency connected. All of our parking revenue goes to Muni and runs our buses and light rail in the city. So having that as something that we're actively working on expanding. That's kind of my main thing in these last few months, is working on expanding that. And it also establishes a framework onto which this sort of more, I'd like to say, kind of policy forward program can be placed. It allows us to kind of, now that we've already priced residential parking, allows us to think more about ways we can use residential parking as a way to meet our climate goals and our Vision Zero and safety goals as well, and our mode shift goals as an agency. The cons are that it's not very effective in vehicle dense areas. There's areas, and this is the map I probably should have included, but some of our areas are have fewer permits and spaces, but a lot of our areas, especially, are ones that are a lot more dense with a lot less off-street parking. The ones that most closely resemble the Upper East Side are areas that have that have more permits than there are parking spaces, and that's all before you start talking about the visitor parking and the fact that the 2-hour time limit does not, for better or worse, does not do a particularly effective job at keeping out visitors. It may keep out people who are there to park for 8 hours, but in a dense urban environment, you have lunches, dinners, coffees, doctor's appointments. You have all these other things that take less than 2 hours, or take more than 2 hours, but long enough for people to not worry about getting a citation in that time. This resident-driven process, I think, has a lot of the advantage for us as an agency politically is that we're not really getting involved in regulating parking without hearing from a groundswell of residents. The problem is that San Francisco doesn't have a community board system, doesn't have any sort of organized local, hyper-local kind of governmental system. Some neighborhoods have, one neighborhood association, some have 3, but most have 0. So it can be really difficult to kind of reach that kind of consensus and have the kind of conversations that we'd like to have to be able to expand and continue the program. There's also this these equity concerns, especially in the wake of COVID. To expand RPP onto your block, you have to go door to door and talk to your neighbors, which, if they don't speak the same language as you, presents a lot of difficulties. If there's safety elements, if you're concerned about your own health, things like that. I just noticed generally that, like, when I'm looking through our old files, 1970s, 1980s, there are a lot of people who are really down, really, it's the low friction to go out to your neighbors, because I think everybody knew their neighbors a little bit more. But as the city has changed and as neighborhoods have changed, that's not been the case as much. And the petition process has been a major point of friction. It does create a little bit of an entitlement for parking. That's something I'll get into kind of at the end of this is what is the purpose of the program and what does it serve? And I think one thing it does serve is that it's the city saying that that the residents deserve to be able to have an easier way to find a place to park. And if we can't deliver on that, or if we need to reallocate the curb in other ways, that can make things difficult. It also requires us as an agency to pick winners and losers, and I think that's the hardest part of my job in terms of crafting our program and working on our program, is that you have to decide, okay, are we going to make this, do we reduce the number of permits per household, and how does that affect multifamily households? How does that affect nuclear, non-nuclear households, multi-generational households? You have to think about, we have teachers, we have all sorts of nonprofits, all these other groups that interact with the community that may not be covered in the program, and you have to decide, is there a way to fit them in, or will we have to tell them that that they're not welcome to the same privileges as residents? So New York's history with RPP, it sounds like that I'm catching things midstream, so I'm not gonna to explain the things that you probably already know, but I found it interesting looking back at the history of residential parking planning in New York. It was a Mayor Bloomberg proposal back in 2008. A lot of city council proposals over the time. There was a state proposal last year, and then one 5 or 6 years ago. And congestion pricing has always kind of been the impetus, at least in these last 15 years or so. The city and its or MTA and its environmental assessment, the parking issues would be temporary as part of the adjustment period. That was their kind of read of the situation. But this is kind of a big unknown. It's going to be a shock to the system that I don't know if there really is much of an equivalent for, at least within kind of the North American planning context. So I definitely understand that the concern and the questions. So my sort of light suggestions, I definitely respect all of the great work that's being done, both from the advocate level and also at the sort of the community organizing, community board level, as well as at staff for elected officials and MTA and all of that. So I don't want to meddle too much, but I just want to sort of give my suggestions. Big thing is collecting data. Data for parking is oftentimes really hard to find and really hard to collect and can be expensive. But having that parking occupancy data at all times of the day and the week, having access to parking, data about access to parking, specifically access to off-street parking, and understanding how that works in the area, and also seeing where these cars, how many of these cars are are registered to people in the neighborhood versus registered to folks in other parts of the city or other parts of the region, to really get an understanding of, how is the curb working today. And also, I think there's a lot of logistics of the program that would really need to be considered and thought through. So working with responsible agencies to understand who would or could administer these sorts of things and understand what the costs of the program would be. So working, I imagine a lot of it would be through NYC DOT, but I'm sure there's other agencies that would be involved as well. So working with them to get that understanding. And I think the biggest question, which I think Craig touched on well in the intro and also in the invitation, was to sort of kind of understand at the neighborhood level the values and how to best craft a system that reflects those values. I think a lot of people who are parking or who are concerned for people who park, who have cars that park on the street, can kind of see RPP as a really big benefit for them. And a lot of people who are sort of on the who have a perspective of making the transportation system focus on non-car modes and to treat the public space and the public right of way in a different way. I think folks in that boat also see a lot of opportunity from residential parking permits and from a system like this. And I think depending on how you craft the system, I think both are true, but that's where the devil's really in the details. I think that if as a community you want to sort of see this as a way to help kind of use the space in a different and new way, then you make the program work that way. If you want to see this space support those who need to have a car and park it in the neighborhood, you could kind of craft it that way. And there is a little bit of a middle ground. It can be sort of difficult to find. I think it all really comes down to what does the city owe to residents who park on the street, and how the city and how the neighborhood and how your community kind of thinks about that. Because it's unless you charge a lot for permits and have a lot of pretty aggressive caps, and have metering alongside of that, unless you go with a pretty aggressive system, this is going to be a system that will likely sort of subsidize and support those who park on the street. So having that conversation about is what should the neighborhood be doing around that will be important. And I'm glad it sounds like that you guys are already having some of those conversations and thinking in that mindset. All right. That's all I have, but I'll be here to answer any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Reno. That was a truly phenomenally informative presentation. It is really incredible just how many of the considerations that we have talked about extensively here and are facing as we think about issues regarding just parking in general, along with more specifically residential parking permits, are dealt with in terms of how San Francisco community is dealing with this. And it was just really, I think, a lot of food for thought as we think about what we may not only want to do in terms of whether we want to pursue policies such as this, but the complexities of what it means to actually administer it and what potential impacts would be. Before I go to questions from our guests, just one quick question that I had was, since I'm sure San Francisco, much like New York, has a large transient population, people who may have vehicles that are registered to addresses outside of your city. How does San Francisco determine residency to allow someone to apply for a permit in the neighborhood in which they claim to reside?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're actually pretty strict about it, which I know can be a point of consternation, especially for folks who have recently moved to the city. But we do, with the exception of students and I believe like travel nurses and diplomats, like a few minor categories, we do require that the vehicle is registered to the address that is also registering for the permit, and that all has to match, including the insurance also has to match. And I know my understanding colloquially is that there's oftentimes within New York City a lot of folks who are have their cars registered in other places for various reasons, legitimate and otherwise. So that would be a consideration in one way or the other for that. I guess it would be possible to sort of relax those standards, but I know especially if New York City were to introduce a permit and the permit would be relatively affordable, any kind of relaxing of those standards would be inviting fraud, because these permits would be very valuable sort of permits, and that's something that we think about and we consider. So we're pretty strict about the checking of the documents just for that fraud perspective.
All right. Well, thank you for that response. So I'm going to invite anyone from the public who has questions to please raise your virtual hand. But I realize also that Will would normally provide an introduction, alerting people how to do that. So I'll allow Will to give those instructions now.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, and thanks everybody for dealing with our technical difficulties earlier. So you'll notice you're currently muted, and you're not going to be able to unmute yourself during the duration of the meeting. Only our co-chairs and our presenters will be able to do that as we move through the agenda. After each of these presentations, just like we just are doing, we'll call on members of the public who wish to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon on your device and then pressing the raise hand button. It's not the wave or the thumbs up, as those will disappear. Only press the raise hand button once, because if you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling in from the phone, it's star plus the number 9 to raise your hand and star 6 to unmute whenever you're called on. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once one of the co-chairs calls on you. If you're having problems, the chat is available for technical support only to help with the Zoom software. It is not to ask questions or make comments to the co-chairs or presenters. They will never see those chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participants section where you'll find the raise hand feature there. And finally, we encourage you not to raise your actual hand or wave at the screen to get our attention. We may not be able to see you, so if you're having problems, chat me. I'm here for support. And with that, it looks like we have Frank and Diego from the public who have their hands up.
And again, I will respectfully request that we just keep it to questions at this point and withhold any commentary. And we hope to have time to be able to come back to that type of discussion.
Hello, my name is Frank Perrance. I'm from Roosevelt Island, and I'm the Roosevelt Island Residents Association president. Thank you for the informative presentation, and I'm going to try to keep it to a question. So I understand that this is based on residents and such. So my questions are, how does that skew the users? Because I'm not sure all the people who care about parking are residents, and why is it residents that are able to get this? And is there a different paradigm that's used in other communities? Maybe it's residents and businesses, or or something. Maybe there's some other plan. What's been your experience with that? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that's one of the big drawbacks of a residential parking permit system, is that it is focused on it is centered on the residents, and I think and it's at least our system, and I think this is even more true of most other cities' programs, is that in its DNA, it is specifically meant for residents, and oftentimes a lot of our RPP areas are specifically created for the exclusion of say employees of nearby hospitals or nearby universities, things like that. So that's sort of that gets kind of into the difficulty of the winners and losers aspect of it. We do allow 1 permit for a business owner in the district, and then 3 for commercial vehicles. And I can't think of any on the top of my head, but I do know that there are some cities that have a much larger number of business permits that would be available. I think the sort of implied thinking in terms of having it be resident focus is this idea that that for a commuter or someone else coming into the neighborhood, that they have that they may have other options for transportation to a neighborhood, but a resident, if they don't have a garage and they will still want to own a car, they don't have any other options for having their car on the street. So there's definitely different ways to go about it. There's also Chicago there's a few places in Chicago that has commercial specific, so they have like an industrial permit program there for more industrial areas that's focused really just on employees. It's something that we're constantly talking about, that we get a lot of, there's a lot of complaints and issues around. and kind of one of the drawbacks of having a resident focus system.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up. You said 170. That it's okay to be a ballpark number.
Yeah.
What was the average rate for monthly parking elsewhere, the normal market rate?
Yeah, so for like an off street, and it's not apples to apples, because they're on street, it is really just like it's not reserved, it's like just a sort of permit to not have the time limits. But depending on the neighborhood, it's usually in the in most of our denser neighborhoods, usually around like 150, 200. In our densest neighborhoods, it can get up to 400 a month for off street. Those are kind of the numbers that we see. We don't really collect those at any sort of real, we don't have a data collection effort around those numbers, but that's what we've seen.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Next we have Diego.
My question is regarding what this parking permit looks like. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, 25 years ago. And it was like a piece of cardboard, which I thought it was really bad because people can share it. It was not tagged to the car. You get it for free and everything. I went to Montreal like 2 years ago, and they have like a big sticker in the back that says like Zone 1, which is pretty good. If you go here to the Nitro residence, they have parking permits for inside. And it's like a little sticker on the front next to the car registration, which is pretty hard to find. So what does San Francisco has?
Yes, and thank you. And that's something that, I should have included. So we actually just recently went through a transition. So we used to have a sticker that was placed on the left bumper. It was about this big, really nice quality, glossy and whatnot. Had the added benefit of my favorite game is always when you go up to Tahoe, see what the last time you see a San Francisco permit on your way up. But in 2022, we moved to a sort of fully virtual system. And this is something that right now is a lot less common for residential permit parking, but is very common at at university campuses or other institutional parking facilities. That's what I had in grad school like 10 years ago, but we're only starting to kind of see this get rolled out at the local level. So the way it works is that when you get your permit, you give your license plate number, and then that gets added to our system. And then the parking control officers will have a license plate recognition kind of scanner on their vehicle that will scan license plate and then compare that against the list of permits for that area. The advantages are that it's for the user, it's a lot more flexible. It will also allow us to do monthly permits. Once we replace our backend system, we're going to move from an annual system to a monthly system. With the physical permits, once the permit is sold, it's out there in the world, and you can't repossess it if a car moves. Which from the visitor perspective, that means that, or which from the parker perspective, the driver perspective, means that if you get a permit and then 3 months in you moved to Oakland or somewhere else, then you're sort of stuck paying for that full year, and you have that permit. Whereas if it's a virtual, we can just say, all right, you're not going to pay next month. It works like Netflix or something where that gets cut off, and then you no longer have a permit. Disadvantage is that we had to figure out this whole new system of we had to buy all of the license plate readers for all of our parking control officer vehicles. We also had to make the back end work and make the permit system talk to the parking control officers, and then we had to set the geographies of the permit areas and make sure that works. So I think it's been working out really well for us. I do think that in a city like New York with a lot of tall buildings, there may be some difficulties with the kind of real time back and forth there. But I think that we've had a lot of success with the license plate recognition based permit system.
And I assume it can be mixed, right? You can have a sticker and a plate recognition. Because we have on alternative parking, we have policemen walking by, so they can easily see who is and who is not.
Yeah, having vehicles have both could help. I think that's something that we could do. Right now, we have for visitors, we still use a hang tag for visitors, so there is kind of both elements. And that is the another sort of particular disadvantage is that if you have we've looked into like a pedestrianized license plate recognition, but it can get expensive. It's a lot easier to do that by vehicle. So if you're looking to have enforcement by foot or by bicycle, it might be harder to do with license plate recognition. You might have to have some sort of mixed system, but something to look about, something to look into, something to think about as once you get into the details of crafting the system and try to estimate costs.
And the last question, if I may, regarding the zones, do you think the community board zone is like a good size?
I would say it's on the bigger side. The sort of the flip side is that you kind of you create these boundaries, and then people who someone with the boundaries 84th Street. There's the Seinfeld episode with Elaine trying to get the Chinese delivery. Kind of reminded of that. You'll have to draw an arbitrary line somewhere, and people who live on one side of the line or the other may be upset. Let's say that, not knowing the geography, but let's say one part of the neighborhood is a lot less dense, there's a lot fewer institutions and creators, job trip generators than another part of the area. Then wherever you draw that line will make that difference. The disadvantage of having a larger area is that if you live at 96th Street and you work at 59th, and you have a car, then you'd be incentivized to drive, and that may not work out very well for the people who live at 60th, 61st Street, and that there's a very clear polarity with that, it seems like, too. So I would caution against that, especially for the folks who live kind of at the southern edge, that are not just as close to the congestion pricing boundary, but closest to the largest center of jobs in the Western world. So something to consider there as well.
And I'm impressed with how you know your audience with your Seinfeld reference. So thank you for that.
Let me just follow up a minute with Raynell. How many enforcement people do you have there? And is it dedicated force or just part of the normal traffic enforcement squad?
Yeah, we have a parking control enforcement division, and within our cost recovery calculations, we calculate about 25 officers are out on a given day. As we've run the numbers, that fluctuates wildly because our parking enforcement is also in charge of working on our special events and working on like emergency street closures, things like that. So that can vary here to there, but I don't know if I necessarily have like a per block or per mile count, but we're working with usually about 25 officers a day.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I guess Evelyn David is the next someone from the public, right?
Yes.
Unmute Evelyn.
Yes, good evening. That was very interesting and very, very, very complicated. And New York being, I do live near the border of 60th Street. I live on Lex between 62 and 63. I'm right here. This all came about, congestion pricing is very terrifying in terms of us living in the zone and with cars coming in and, looking for parking, et cetera. So I sort of envisioned this in a different way, more like parking passes for people that had physical ailments, for the handicapped. However, having said that, I have a question. My question is, and this is what I sort of thought, if we live here, which we do, all of us, we are residents of this area. How do you prove that? Well, where do you vote? If you show and you prove every year your voter registration that you vote in the district, which is what you would be doing, that should be enough. I mean, if your car is registered someplace else, I'm sort of don't like that idea, because there's so many people I know that live in this area that live here, vote here, and their cars are registered someplace else. Yeah. So what a nightmare it would be to have to go to DOT and change everything up. Anyway, it's an idea. I'm putting it out there, and I don't know if you ever thought about that, but in New York City, that's the way it works. We are registered to vote in our area, in our district. Okay.
I'll let Raynell comment on that, but at the same time, that would also restrict anyone who is not a citizen and able to vote from being able to park.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think for us, this has been the way that we do the residency checks and vehicle verifications, et cetera, that has predated me, so I wasn't I wasn't around for the conversations. But I think I think there's always a lot of intersecting systems, and I think the reliance on and I found this in other parts of my work, but the reliance on other systems run by other agencies or run under other auspices, could be really can be really difficult because you don't know if they're updated as well as you want them to be, and if there's an issue, you have to talk to the person at the other agency. So I think for us, and speaking for the team that actually does self permits, I think they appreciate, you show up, you have the documents all written there, and then you can check that off. But and there is also, and I don't know if you would necessarily explicitly say this is one of the advantages for us, but the way the DMV registrations work is that some portion of the DMV annual registration fee for vehicles registered in San Francisco comes back to San Francisco to support our streets, roads, all of that. I think that would be sort of advantage, disadvantage. I think there is definitely a friction to having to go and re-register everything and make sure that everything is aligned, especially for people moving in new. And I don't know how the laws are there. In California, the law is 10 days. You have 10 days to change your registration, or else you're in violation of the law. So we have a lot of backing of the state law to be able to say, like, hey, you have to be registered here because your car is here. The laws may be different in New York, so you may be able to kind of handle that a little bit differently, and maybe make a system that is a little bit more lenient on various questions of registration address and ways to prove your residency.
Well, you are supposed to register your car here if you move here within a certain time, but it's one of the violations that people routinely do because they think it's cheaper to register it somewhere else, and I guess that's an issue of whether or not they should get any benefits because of that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Do we? I guess we, Craig. I guess we don't have any further.
Last call. If you'd like to participate and ask a question, look for the reactions icon on your device.
And I feel like we should move on to our members anyway.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah. Rita's had her hand up for a long time.
Go ahead, Rita.
Go ahead, Rita.
Yeah.
It's the only way you can get 2 cents in. Raynell, thank you very much for this presentation. I have a question. Do you have a limited amount of permits that you issue? And do you have a waiting list? And how long is that waiting list generally in order to get a permit?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we actually do not use a waiting list. It is, I think of it kind of, there is a point where it gets to kind of like New York, where it's, there's no system, no one's really trying to make things better. You just kind of have to go at it. And I think for us, that particular element is difficult because we have we don't have a waiting list. In some areas we'll get very, very oversubscribed. I think that's a sort of a balancing act that we've talked about waiting lists before and having area limits. The advantage is clear that it would reduce the number of cars parked on the street. The disadvantage is that you're advantaging current residents for future residents and kind of creating this double system. And the other thing is the more data that we've collected in our neighborhoods, the neighborhoods that have a pretty high residential parking issue, very major residential parking issue, the ones that are, at least the ones that are currently within the system, within our residential parking system, those are also neighborhoods that have a really high visitor parking, and those that take advantage of the 2-hour. So in an area like North Beach, which is a neighborhood that's directly north of downtown, it's a very dense neighborhood, not many garages. There's a lot of residents who have permits, but it's also an area that you have a lot of people visiting to go to Coit Tower and to ride the cable cars and do all of that, and go to great restaurants. Anything that we do just to limit the residents without taking a look at the regulation side of things would probably not be successful. So I don't think that's something that we'll take a look at until we really can take a closer look at the regulation side of things and work with the and use paid parking as as something to kind of deter a little bit of the visitor parking, and then maybe consider the permit limiting. There are areas further out in San Francisco that actually aren't in the residential parking permit program, where that the problem really is just residential parking. There are just too many residents with too many cars. And if we ever do a program in those areas, it's definitely something that we would take a look at as part of the ways to manage this, in addition to having just more limits on how many cars per household or per driver we could sell. But Amsterdam is a big example, and a lot of the European cities are examples of cities that do use a waiting list program and as a way to cap the permits in a given area. They also have, Europe across the board. Their permits are also very affordable. So they instead of using price as a lever, they just have a cap and a waiting list, and it works. It works well for the residents who are there and are getting under the wire, but can make things difficult for new residents.
And therefore, if there's parking on both sides of the street, does one side require a parking permit and the other not a resident, a permit, and the other side not? Or do all the streets require a permit?
That's a good question.
Major.
Yeah, so it's a good question. In San Francisco, it's both sides of the street within RPP, within a permit area, require it. I've floated doing something like that a few times in a few different neighborhoods, and it has not gone well. I'm trying to remember. I think there's a city I think it was either Hoboken or Jersey City or some city in that part of New Jersey that does do that. That has kind of residential on one side, and then I think it's meters on the other side. So it's not unheard of, but it's not what we do. We kind of let the 2 hour, or where we have the meters kind of add that flexibility.
Austin had parking on one side and for residents and the other side not for residents.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Cost is next. He's had his hand up for a while. Can we unmute Cost?
So the permits are based on the number of cars rather than the residents of a unit, correct?
Yeah, so we have, a few different things. So in most of our RPP areas right now, it is a 4 permit per household. So per apartment, per house cap, regardless of the number of units. So 1 unit, 500 unit building, doesn't matter. If there's a 500 unit building, all 500 of those units could get.
No, not the whole building. I mean, per unit. If I have 4 people in an apartment and each one has a car, those people can get 4 permits.
Yes, and right now the way it works is that even if it was just you in that apartment, you would also still be able to get 4 permits. But we're looking at changing the rules in the next year or so to make it so that you would have to have 4 people to be able to buy the 4 permits.
So wait a minute. I can get 4 permits with 1 car.
Oh no, sorry. 4 permits if you had 4 cars. If you personally
okay. So it's actually based on the number of cars with a maximum of 4 per apartment. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How did you calculate the number of spaces per area?
That's a good question. I think the short answer is we don't / haven't really. We did a parking census in 2014, but because of various changes on the street, that's kind of gone out of date. When we create a new area, we do a study and figure out the number of permits we expect to sell, and the number of spaces, and make sure that those are compatible. But at this point, for each area, we have an estimate of the number of spaces that's based on the parking census that we did about 10 years ago now. But it's really difficult for a number of reasons. One is that outside of the metered areas in San Francisco, the spaces are unmarked. So, it really depends on how people park this determines how many spaces there are. And it's also really hard for us to keep up with all the other changes, whether there be zones added for visibility at the intersections or bike share stations added, things like that. And we're working on, we have a whole thing coming up next year that'll fix all of that. But it is a difficult problem, because it's important to know that stuff, especially if you're going to have a cap system. That's another reason that would make a cap system difficult, is you really have to know how many spaces you're working with and going from there. So that'd be a data need for sure.
So theoretically, you could be selling more permits than spaces.
Yes, and we definitely are in some situations, and I think that is it's something that it's not ideal, obviously, but I think given the kind of the political climate around parking, especially in San Francisco, I think a lot of the other options, which are a lot of the things that have just been discussed, things like capping at the household level, capping at the area level, charging more for permits, and charging more for visitor parking, all of those factors all carry their own political difficulty with them. So for now, at least, the inertia of the system being as it is has carried through. Not what I would recommend for a new system, but that's kind of the way these big institutions work, is that once you have something and enough people are fine with it, then it kind of rolls along.
So if I have a permit for Zone A, I park in Zone B and get a citation, am I up for 25% or 100% of the fine?
You would still get the full fine. Yeah, all of the areas are separate.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks,
All right,
Gus.
and I actually have a follow-up question, but I'll go after Juno speaks.
Yeah, let's unmute Juno.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask, for neighborhoods that are ideal for residential parking permits, what percentage of parking is already, like before the program starts, taken up by residents?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think I don't know if I necessarily have that number. I think it would depend on the goal, and it would depend on the regulation that you're using alongside of the permit. So let's say, for example, you have a neighborhood that's 100%, it's fully parked up and it's 100% residents. I would think that you would, I think in that situation, it's ideal if and only if you have a system that is really good at limiting the resident parking, because residential permit parking, as we do it in San Francisco, was developed to reduce visitor parking, commuter parking. And if you have an area where it's just residential parking, if you have an area that's 100% resident parking, or even like 90, 80% resident parking, and you have a system that is really laser focused on the visitors, let's say you have a system that is kind of like San Francisco's, where you say you don't really have much of a limit for permits. The permits are not super expensive for most parkers, and the limitation for visitors is 2 hours. Then you're not really going to move the needle much. I think the flip side is definitely more in an area where if you have something where you have it's almost all visitors, and you can, and this is kind of key, you can also demonstrate that there is demand from residents, and that there are cars that would be parking in this area but can't because of all the visitor parking. Then you could sort of take a look more closely at a kind of a visitor focused system. But we've been sort of grappling with that now as we're going through our policy changes, and I don't really know necessarily if there is a magic number, but just good to keep in mind that if you're an area that is really heavily residents taking up the parking, then you're going to want to look at a system that not just focuses on the visitors, but also focuses on the residents.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So my follow-up question, which I think when you're responding to the prior speaker, and you talked about the vehicle based system that San Francisco has, I guess I'm wondering, especially in a more densely populated area, much like our community is, how would something like that dovetail with other policies and initiatives of, say, San Francisco in terms of sustainability and the broader question of curb management and how there are now more competing uses for the curbside. Because I guess I don't, and as a corollary, do you know offhand what the vehicle ownership rate per household is? I know in our community it's somewhere around 25 to 30%. I don't know what it is in areas that would be sort of comparable to our district there, but again, it all blends in together in terms of the broader policy implications. So I'm wondering if you could just comment on that.
Yeah, it's a good question. In San Francisco, I don't remember the exact number, but it's definitely above 50. In a lot of the neighborhoods where we have the permit program, it is in the sort of closer to 30, 40% range. But I think citywide, it's above 50% of households that have vehicles. It is, I mean, it can be a difficult question. I think when I oftentimes have days where I'm like, man, I wish we were like New York and we didn't even, the government didn't even interfere with any of this, and we just kind of let people decide if they think that this is a tenable situation for them. But I think for us, talking about some of these bigger picture transportation goals, I think having something like this in place can allow us, and a lot of my job right now is finding out exactly how much it allows us, but it can allow us to do a lot more interesting things with the residential curb. And those things, including pricing, can help kind of move things in the right direction for us, mostly because the money that we get from meters and from citations goes to support our transit system. I think it provides a framework for kind of talking about and thinking about this sort of parking space, which doesn't exist when you don't have anything. I think the sort of bigger picture question though is how does this affect car ownership, and how does this affect driver behavior and transportation trip choices, things like that, and the way you think about it is if somebody moves to your neighborhood today from an area where they're used to having a car, when they get to the Upper East Side, they're gonna try to find a place to park, try to make that work, and they maybe they'll choose to keep their car, maybe they won't. But if you have the permit program, it will make them more likely to make them more likely to say, hey, it looks like we have this program, seems to be working, seems to make it easier for us to have a car, and that's within our sort of, at least our big picture conversations in San Francisco, our policies, transit first and vision zero. That's not something that really is in line with those policies, which is, I think, a difficulty that I have with our current program as it is. But it also definitely improves the quality of life for residents who rely on that and who need that. And we have a sprawling region as well, and very regional sort of center. And you have a lot of people who are coming in and going out and who rely on that and need that. So that's something that we have to balance. But yeah, I think what we found, we had a program called SF Park in the 2010s, and what we found with that is that when you price parking and you price parking correctly, you better manage the resource of parking, and revenue aside, you make it easier for people to find a place to park, and you reduce the congestion that comes with circling for parking and looking for parking. So I think pricing parking is definitely like the core of all the conversations around curb management, and residential parking permits are a way to price parking in a way that helps sort of shield the residents of a neighborhood from some of that. And I think that if New York were to pursue a residential parking permit program, the ideal would be one that is not a 2-hour limit and does not keep the free parking around. I think the idea would be that we would kind of use this to have a larger conversation about how to manage the curb in a way, not just kind of leaving it to just people circling for parking and the luck and the chance of finding a space, but trying to manage that a little bit better.
All right. Well, thank you for that response.
We have one last question, then I think we should move on.
Agreed.
Becca, Would identify yourself, please, for the record?
Hi, my name is Rebecca Troshanik. I'm just a public resident of Roosevelt Island. And I was just wondering, how does this program currently work today for your ADA placards or your handicap accessible plaques? Because at least I don't know San Francisco's law, but I know in New York and Michigan, where I'm from originally, you're allowed to park at metered spaces without having to pay. So is there something worked out in this program for the handicap accessibility needs as well?
Yeah, so you're in San Francisco, you can park also at a meter or in a residential parking space and not pay.
Okay.
Yeah, exempted here as well.
Good. Well, listen, I think it's been a great discussion, and Raynell, we really appreciate you spending the time. You obviously put together a presentation that took some time, and it's been very helpful and informative.
Yeah, thanks so much, and I'm sure my former colleague Tori Winters is your next presenter. I'm sure you'll get a great one from her as well, or at least on that team. So, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much.
I guess we should note that it's about 7:40, and we're going to item 2 on the agenda. Craig, do you want to introduce item 2? We have the MTA presenting 3 different bus situations here.
Sure. The first 2 items that are going to be presented are I think they requested that we talk about the express routes first. So there are 2 proposed changes to express routes serving between Manhattan and the Bronx. One, a rerouting of the BXM10, and one of just a simple elimination of a bus stop on the BXM2 in our districts. So I guess who wants to take the lead from New York City Transit? Katerina, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can just start us off and introduce this presentation. My colleague Jamie Cho is here and has shared her screen. So just for those that I haven't met yet, my name is Katerina Paturi, Assistant Director of Government Community Relations at New York City Transit. I cover Community Board 8. And as I mentioned before, I'm joined by my colleague Jamie Cho from our Bus Operations Planning Division. So thank you again to the Transportation Committee for having us, and it's great to see many familiar names and faces from the Roosevelt Island Committee this evening as well. So we're going to present to you this evening 2 planned route modifications to these 2 express bus routes, and that specifically connect Manhattan areas of CB8 and the Bronx. My colleague Jamie will take you through some further details to the changes that we're planning to implement.
Thank you, Katerina, and good evening, and thank you everyone for having us. Before starting, I just wanted to note that all the stop changes mentioned only refers to the BXM2 and the BXM10. So jumping right in, for the BXM2, in response to customer requests, 2 new BXM2 stops will be established in the Upper East Side or Manhattan. They are a new northbound pickup stop on Madison Avenue at 123rd Street, as well as a new southbound drop-off stop on 5th Avenue at 125th Street. These new stops will allow customers to connect to nearby subway and local bus routes at 125th Street and access other destinations in the area as well. In addition, the southbound BXM2 drop-off stop on 5th Avenue at 94th Street will be eliminated. The stop will be removed due to its proximity to another drop-off stop just 4 blocks away at East 98th Street, which is much more heavily used by our customers. And the local routes at this eliminated drop-off stop will stay as is. And for the BXM10, also in response to customer requests, the southbound route path will be permanently rerouted from 2nd Avenue to 5th Avenue between 116th Street and 86th Street. The BXM10 will then travel on 86th Street before resuming its regular routing on 5th Avenue. And to complement this, there will be 2 new southbound drop-off stops on 2nd Avenue at 87th and also 96th Streets, and both will be at existing M15 stops. Meanwhile, a new northbound pickup stop will be established on 3rd Avenue at 97th Street, which will enable customers to transfer to local bus routes such as the M96, as well as subway lines such as the Q train. And to gather customer feedback on this reroute, in November 2023, we conducted surveys of BXM10 customers and found that many of those who responded prefer this reroute over the current route. And in addition, a running time analysis was performed and it indicated slightly faster bus speeds on 2nd Avenue compared to 5th Avenue, which indicates travel times will roughly stay the same after implementation. And the northbound travel path will remain unchanged, and there will not be any changes to any of the existing stops. And again, we intend for these 2 service changes to go into effect on March 31st. Thank you all. And now back to Katarina.
Thanks, Noelle. Sorry about that. So just wanted to note a couple of things, a couple of ways that we're going to plan to be in touch with the public about these route modifications. So, of course, notifications and meetings with community boards such as CB8 and with elected officials' offices in affected areas of both Manhattan and the Bronx. Our marketing team will also have customer communications, alerting customers to the route changes on the live MTA bus times app and on our website, and also available via text, with signage posted at stops where it's applicable. And the planned implementation for both of these modifications is this spring on March 31st, 2024.
Okay. I see we have someone from the public, Jordan Stein. Can we unmute Jordan?
Hey there, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. I just wanted to speak about the Roosevelt Island, Q102.
We're going to get to that in a moment.
Jordan, this is about the BX10 and 2 here.
Yeah, we wanted to deal with this one first because that was going to be a very quick discussion.
Right.
We will be presenting the Q102 in a moment.
Is anyone from the public? I don't see anyone. Okay, we'll go to Michelle then. Michelle Birnbaum.
Yeah, thank you. Can you just clarify for me again the changes in that bus that goes to 86th Street, and you're changing it from coming down 5th to coming down 2nd? Can you just go over that again for me, if you don't mind?
Sure. So originally, the BXM10 southbound route went down 5th Avenue. Well,
as per the green.
Yes.
Broken line.
Green dash line. Yeah.
Yeah.
But now, we're going to reroute it down 2nd Avenue so that it could make stops on 2nd Avenue at East 89th Street and then 2nd Avenue at East 87th Street, because we had a lot of customers requests for this reroute, and a lot of people coming down from the Bronx, they live or work in that area, so they would like to see those stops be added.
So you said a stop at 89th Street. I don't see that on 2nd
Oh, I'm
Avenue.
sorry. I think I said that wrong. 2nd Avenue at 96.
Okay, so the stop then.
And then 2nd Avenue at 87th.
Okay, so then it stops, and between 96, the next stop, well, the stop prior to it is 121st Street, correct?
Correct.
And then that down to 96. Now, what is that 3rd Avenue and 97th Street represent?
Oh, so that's an additional northbound stop that we want to establish to make the pairing with the new 2nd Avenue at 96th Street, because then it will make it easier for the customers who are in that area to board and alight in that area.
And which is the stop that you're proposing to eliminate?
That is for BXM2. For BXM10, there is no stop eliminations, just establishments.
All right, and BXM2, two, you said. Which is the one that you want to eliminate?
That would be Fifth Avenue at 94th Street.
Okay. Now, have you know, we had a problem with the Second Avenue bus not wanting to stop at 72nd, claimed that we didn't need it. There were no people, not enough people, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality was that a lot of people really, really missed that stop, and that there were enough that were using it that would have liked for it to remain. So I'm looking at Fifth Avenue and 98th, and it is 4 blocks to Fifth Avenue and 94th. I see. What's the next stop after 98th Street?
For the BXM2?
Going south, yeah.
Okay, so it's 98th and then 94th and then 80th.
Okay, but you want to eliminate 94th.
Correct.
So we'll go from 98th to 80th, which is 18 blocks.
Correct.
Now, maybe I can understand you don't want 98th Street just 4 blocks north of the 94th Street, but is there a way you could split the difference so that it's not 18 blocks between stops?
Well, this is an express route, and we do want to have better stop spacing. And 4 blocks between 2 express stops is just too close to each other. And then also there is.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. There is less people alighting at 94th Street compared to 98th Street.
Can you tell us just exactly how many people are alighting at 94th Street on an average week?
Sure. So approximately during the weekdays, it is about 30 customers alighting at 94th Street and about 60 customers alighting at 98th Street. Let me just double check to make sure those numbers are correct.
I'm not actually disputing the fact that you might not want 2 express stops 4 blocks apart. What I am asking is that if you eliminate that 94th Street, you have 2 stops 18 blocks apart, because you have one at 98th and your next one is 80th. And I'm asking if it doesn't make sense to put one in the middle, say at 88th Street or 89th Street.
Yeah, but that's the wrong question, at least to me. The question is what right now it stops at 98th, 94th, and 80th. Isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah, but they're eliminating 94th.
I understand. But eliminating 94th, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to put something in 80th, because they're saying 94th isn't used so very much, and it doesn't sound like it. And so going from 98th to 80th is not a significant change, frankly, just eliminating 94th Street.
Right, and 80th Street is more aligned with some of obviously the major trip generator over there. It provides for a connection to the M79 crosstown. And I'm guessing that is really what is driving the stop spacing in that area, rather than as you get to 88th Street, where there are a few institutions, but not to the same extent as further south.
No.
So let me ask you, will you keep count and do a study of this once you institute it and see whether or not it's the right decision?
Yeah, we'll definitely monitor all this implementation, as well as both for the BXM2 and BXM10.
Okay, thank you.
I see Rob Thompson from the MTA wants to say something. I don't know if he wants to still say it, but go ahead if you do. Why don't we unmute
Yes, thank you. Yeah, this is Rob Thompson, also from MTA Operations Planning. I just wanted to add that, with an express bus route, generally outside of, Midtown Manhattan area, the stop spacing is typically half mile, a mile, or even more. So, having 4 blocks is far too close together, but even 10 blocks is pretty close together for an express bus stop. So that's, we're from that perspective, we think removing this one stop is pretty reasonable, and having a stop at 98th Street for near Mount Sinai Hospital, and down at around 80th Street for the museum area.
Yeah. I just had one quick question regarding the new stops being proposed for Second Avenue. Typically, I know that you have separate stops for express buses, but for drop-offs, are they typically signed? I can't remember. And are they going to, when you mentioned that they're going to coexist with the M15 stops, are those going to be aligned with the local or SBS stops?
The local stops.
Well,
Greg, your other question was about signage coexisting.
Right. Do you have a drop-off only sign for
We will.
places, or will it be unsigned?
It'll all be signed.
Okay.
Okay, I guess we're done with those two buses, and we're going to go to the 102 to reroute to replace the 102 between the South Loop Road and Broadway.
And just to check, you're not expecting any type of resolution on those, right? That was more informational.
Correct. Yep.
Correct.
Okay. So then just moving on to the Q102, which I know is the main attraction for especially those that are here from Roosevelt Island. Just a little context. So the recommendations that are going to be presented emanated from the Queens Bus Redesign project that New York City Transit had been working on for many years at this point. And I think one of the concerns that will likely be raised is I think this was one of those instances where the manner in which community board lines are drawn and the relationship of Roosevelt Island being within Manhattan Community District 8 resulted in perhaps an oversight where we never received an initial presentation on the Queens Bus redesign, which makes sense because we're not Queens, and technically Roosevelt Island isn't Queens, but given that it is only a Queens-based route that serves Roosevelt Island, I think there is probably a missed opportunity there to have had some community board conversation beforehand. So I think that may color some of the conversation that takes place. So I don't know if I'm correct on that history, but I did want to just note that as we lead into that.
Well, thank you, Craig. My name is Kate Contino. I'm a Director of Special Projects and Strategic Initiatives in the Government Community Relations team with Katarina, and I also work with the Queens West Network Redesign team. Rest assured, we haven't been out to community boards since before the pandemic. The community board presentations come at specific phases in this larger initiative. So we are making the rounds now. Your questions were perfectly timed. We're happy to go through this with you all tonight. The team prepared a short deck. It focuses on the Q104, but it also does touch on the other routes that serve your district. And then once they're done presenting, we'll hand it back to you to facilitate Q&A. Does that sound good?
Right, fine.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, and just in order to keep things moving, unless you see that it's essential, I think you could really just focus on the Roosevelt Island impacts rather than going through the entire Queens Bus.
Oh no, only the routes that serve CB8. It's only a couple.
Okay.
Yeah. We promise.
All right, thank you.
Great, thanks, Kate. So yeah, like Kate said, we'll be getting into a little bit of background for the project because it has been going on for some time, but then we'll dive into the CD8 routes. So with that, we can go right into the next slide. I know we're in Manhattan tonight, but I think I always like to phrase how unique Queens is, and by extension, Queens routes that come in to serve Manhattan. So Queens is very unique in the sense where we have 113 bus routes and 800,000 customers on an average weekday. It's a lot of booming centers that are both, the established, I guess, commercial areas, but we're also seeing employment centers that have been really expanding away from the traditional hubs of Jamaica, Flushing, and Long Island City. And so we're really taking this opportunity to gather everyone's feedback and pair that with what we're seeing in the changes at both the demographic and the travel pattern shifts over the last couple decades. Next slide. Great. So we start every redesign by asking our customers what their priorities are. Like I said, this is a once in a lifetime holistic look at how we can make improvements to the Queens bus network. And so when we begin each project, we create what is called an existing conditions report. And as part of that, we ask our customers, along with the specific route level feedback that they have, where they would like to see changes or improvements from us overall, thinking about the entire system. So it's not surprising that the feedback that we received really fell into one of these 4 categories. So being that they want reliable service, so being able to rely on the buses to arrive when expected, faster travel. So they really expressed concerns about delays, slow bus service, and congestion. That's not unique to Queens. So I think there's a lot of themes that we're hitting on that are also very common in Manhattan, as well as better connections. I think this is something that we focus a lot upon in this plan, and that's customers wanting connections not only to be strengthened within the borough, but also to the neighboring boroughs such as Manhattan, and then lastly, simplified service. Next slide. And then when thinking about how we can start to address these customer priorities and work towards these, we have kind of like a set of strategies or redesign strategies that are in our toolbox. And we can get into more of the details of those as we're taking questions on the individual routes, but I'll just go through them really quickly. So simplifying the network with improved route design. So this could refer to straighter and more direct routing or a new route type, enhancing connectivity. So again, this is touching upon building out a better bus network grid to create the new connections that we could see, but also the connections and the desires of the network that we're hearing from our customers or that have been identified by our operators, as well as strengthening that interborough travel, like I previously mentioned, improving the frequency. So building a better all-day frequent network. This was certainly a key theme in Queens. Balancing bus stops. I know that this is always a delicate balance, and I think this is a testament to how long this project has been going on, that we've been able to get a lot of feedback that is very granular and at the stop levels. We've been able to iterate on that with each version of the plan that we've released, as well as expanding bus priority with our colleagues at New York City DOT. We may be putting out the bus service, but we certainly couldn't do it without them, helping to, keep the buses moving, and then also to easily access the curb and to provide the space for our customers to alight from. Improving transit equity, so focusing the improvements in the areas with the greatest need for transit service. And then last but not least, improving accessibility. So this doesn't only refer to accessibility at the stop level, but also when we're thinking about the bus to subway or bus to rail connection, making more of the network in the city easy to access for people who are trying to get on or transfer at specific stops, and making those ADA compliant. Next slide. Just a couple quick reminders, because I know we just came from talking about some changes for Bronx Manhattan routes, and Queens redesign is a little bit unique in the sense that we've built upon the previous redesigns, but just want to call out a couple items that people can expect to see that are different in the Queens plan. So the first one here is the relationship between local and limited routes. Historically, throughout the city, there have been underlying local versions of each limited route. In Queens, we're proposing for the limited routes to stand alone. So to respond to that, though, we do realize that the limited routes are going to have to stop a lot more frequently. So you'll notice in the average stop spacing box at the top right of this slide that we're actually proposing to reduce the stop spacing for limited routes. And then the other new change is, or new difference in this redesign compared to previous redesigns, is the introduction of a new route type. So that is the rush routes that you're seeing in purple at the bottom left of this slide. And the rush routes are really route types that have 2 types of stop spacing. So on one end, it has more local style stop spacing. And then on the other end of the route where, it's joined on a main corridor and there are other bus options, the rush route is really supposed to stop at the main transfer points that are at the key community areas that have been flagged to us by either our riders or by the operators. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of feedback that comes with any sort of, stop or route type changes. So we've been iterating with the specific feedback that we receive each round of outreach. And we've been monitoring the changes to the stop level. And we were happy to see that as a result of the proposed final plan that we released in December, that 83% of the riders will still be able to continue to use the same stop, a number that we'll be updating and monitoring as we go forward. Next slide. So just highlighting here, I know I won't get too much into the details here because again, we're in Manhattan, but we couldn't do this without our colleagues at New York City DOT. So in the plan, you'll also notice the corridors, the bus priority corridors that we have coordinated with on New York City DOT in 3 different colors here. The yellow ones are your upcoming corridors. The green or the teal ones are your completed corridors. And then the purple ones are considered the primary corridors, but still in the queue. Although we're in Manhattan, you'll also notice that Queens Boulevard is on there. We have a route that we're going to be covering today that obviously comes into Manhattan that uses part of this, or I guess 2 technically. So just flagging that is something that we're coordinating with DOT on. Next slide. And then one more from me before we get into the individual route profiles themselves. So I think because this project has been going on so long and there's a couple versions that people may have been paying attention to since we started in 2019, we have this summary slide and it's in the deck that was provided, I think, or is going to be provided, but really highlighting what people can expect to see in this part of Queens as we are about to come into Manhattan, the key changes from the new draft plan. So that was the last version of the plan that we released in March 2022 before we released the proposed final plan in December 2023. So just really quickly, Q63 service along Broadway was withdrawn in favor of connecting 35th Ave riders to Flushing via Northern Boulevard. Q69 service to Queens Plaza was maintained. Service between Steinway and Williamsburg was withdrawn in favor of the new Q101 service between Steinway and Hunters Point, and then Q103 service between Astoria and Hunters Point maintained. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andre, and then we'll get into the individual route profiles themselves.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. Thank you very much, Tori. Good evening, everyone. My name is Andre Prigoff. I'm a transportation planner working on the Queens Bus Network redesign. Before we get into the route profiles, we have to first figure out what a route profile is. It's a summary of the route that will help riders understand the changes that are being proposed on their route. Each of the route profiles are color-coded depending on the route types that Tori just explained. And the local ones are green, the rush ones are purple, the limited routes are red, and the crosstown and SPS routes are blue. Under the header of the route profile, there is an indication of whether this has been a change since the new draft plan, whether this is a new route, whether there's been a routing change, whether there's been a schedule change. You'll of course also see the route number, the destination associated with that route number, any route improvements that we have done, a small route proposal summary, existing and proposed schedules for the frequencies and hours of service, and a link to the individual route profile page where you can provide feedback either via our interactive remix map, which we'll talk about a little bit later, or the MTA comment portal. Each of the route profiles also comes with a stop list like this that details all the existing and proposed stops for both directions of a route. The proposal note column cites whether a certain stop may have been added, removed, or maintained. A map of all the proposed stop changes can be found online on the Remix site. Please continue to send in your feedback about the specific stops that you have questions, comments, or concerns about. The more granular this type of feedback is, the more we are informed about the changes that we could make for the next iteration of the plan. And without further ado, the marquee event, the Q104. Before of course, we'll get into the Q&A later, but for now, we'll just be presenting what the Q104 is and how it will affect Roosevelt Island residents. The proposed Q104 would be extended to serve Roosevelt Island at its western terminal, replacing existing Q102 service, which would be discontinued. The Q104 would continue to serve Broadway and 48th Street, maintaining its connection with the 7 train. Most existing Q102 connections would be maintained on the proposed Q104. Existing Q102 service along East Loop Road, West Loop Road, south of the Roosevelt Island F train station would be discontinued. Existing Q102 service along 31st Street would be replaced by the proposed Q105. Both frequency and spans would be increased to resemble Q102 service. To better see how the proposed Q104 compares to the existing Q102, let's look at some maps. On the left, we have the existing Q102. On the right, we have the proposed Q104. As we can see, aside from the E train, which roughly parallels the F train in both Manhattan and Queens, subway connections between the two routes are very similar. If you live in Roosevelt Island and you use the Q102 to get to places on the island or to the F train, your service will be mostly maintained as is. If you're trying to head to points in Astoria, the proposed Q104 will bring you there quicker and more reliably than the existing Q102, and you'll be able to make easier transfers to other Astoria buses that you're currently able to. If you're trying to get to the N, W, or 7 in Queensboro Plaza, you'll be able to pick up the NW at Broadway and the 7 at 46th Street, Bliss Street, both of which are slated to become accessible in the near future. If you're trying to get to the M and R in Queens Plaza, you'll be able to get on the M and R at Steinway Street, which is also slated to become accessible in the near future, or at 46th Street. If you're trying to get to destinations in Long Island City, you can take the proposed Q104 or the F train to 21st Street and catch one of our improved 21st Street services at Broadway 21st Street. The proposed Q69, which stops on 21st Street, will act as a rush route to Long Island City, stopping only at key destinations and major transfer points. And the proposed B62 will be a new limited route in this area that will provide easy connections to Queensboro Plaza, Court Square, and Hunters Point. We know this is a hot button item, so please let us know if there are any other connections that you're currently making that we haven't yet mentioned. Please be sure to mention both the start point and the end point of your current Q102 trip. Like the stop question that I mentioned earlier, the more specific you are with your feedback, the more informed we'll be. Before we get into our Q&A, I'd like to go over some of the other routes that touch or border CB8. These routes might be less familiar for CB8 folks, but some people in the community might take them. And we're just going to get into the proposed changes that we're doing on those routes. We'll start with the Q32, which would mostly maintain its existing routing except for a minor change. In the westbound direction approaching the Queensboro Bridge, buses would no longer travel around Dutch Kills Green via 41st Avenue and Queens Plaza North, avoiding a congested route deviation. As a result, buses would no longer stop on Queens Plaza North and would approach the bridge directly from Queens Boulevard. Weekday frequencies would be slightly adjusted in select time periods. Service would continue to operate during the same hours. The proposed Q60 would mostly maintain its existing routing except for a minor change. In the westbound direction approaching the Queensboro Bridge, this is very similar to the Q32, buses would no longer travel around Dutch Kills Green via 41st Avenue, Queens Plaza North, avoiding a congested route deviation. As a result, buses would no longer stop on Queens Plaza North and would approach the bridge directly from Queens Boulevard. No frequency or service span changes are being proposed at this time for the Q60. The proposed Q101 would be realigned to serve Hunters Point via Jackson Avenue instead of serving Manhattan. This routing provides new direct connections from Steinway Street to Long Island City and the waterfront. It also avoids congestion on the Queensboro Bridge, improving the route's reliability. Bus service to Manhattan would still be provided by the Q32 and the Q60. Weekday and Saturday frequencies would be slightly adjusted to match ridership patterns. Service would continue to operate 24 hours. And with that, I'll pass it off to Kate Contino, who will tell you about outreach and feedback for this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we are here for your feedback tonight, but we know that this is a small segment of the community. So we've set up a number of ways for folks to let us know what they think about these proposals. The most accessible is probably our future trip planner, where you put in your origin and your destination, and it'll populate what your new trip could look like in the new network. After that, we have Remix, which you see a screen grab of here. This is a pretty sophisticated interactive mapping tool where you can go in, zoom into the intersection level and drop a geo-targeted comment right there in the map that comes back to our team. We also have a dedicated comment portal on the project website that will be open until after project implementation. And then all of your regular MTA channels. 511, our WhatsApp is translatable into some 160 languages, and other mechanisms for the public. For the board, you should let Katerina know what you think, and she'll share that with our team. But for the public, we've set up a number of different ways for you to let us know your input. Next slide, please. So just a broad timeline. We've been working on this project for 5 years. We had started in April 19. We're working towards promoting our draft plan in the winter of 2020. COVID hit. We went on pause for 18 months. We came back out in December of 21 and withdrew that plan because everyone hated it. Nobody liked it. I've never seen a borough so united as Queens against the original draft plan. It was fun. But we wrote a new one and it was much better received. We did outreach on it a couple summers ago. We took all of that back in, revised our proposals based on what we heard, and are out sounding out the proposed final plan now here with you tonight and across the borough of Queens throughout the spring. That will culminate in a public hearing towards the end of Q2 is our expectation. It will be noticed and announced. It will also be hybrid so that folks don't have to travel because it will be at a physical location, but also hybrid. We'll take all of that feedback, what we hear. If necessary, we will write what we're calling a final plan addendum. And that is a document that we would take to the MTA board for a vote, hopefully in the fall of this year. If all of those things hit their milestone, we'd be talking about implementation in the middle of 2025. And with that, we will turn it back over to your committee for your questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Before we move on to questions from the public and our members, just 2 quick questions. First, can you just clarify what specific outreach have you done previously throughout this process for Roosevelt Island itself? Or
Sure. I don't have all the dates in front of me. We have met with reps of Roosevelt Island a couple times throughout this process. We haven't done community boards at every step of the way, which is what I was saying at the beginning, but we also want to hear what you think. We are, we are in our outreach phase now. So if there's something you think we should be doing, we will. And we'll also be meeting with representatives of Kohler Hospital in a few weeks.
Right. No, I guess my question was, just in the past, did you have a specific public meeting for the general population of Roosevelt Island, or did you only meet with, say, specific?
We have not had a general meeting on Roosevelt Island, though. There hasn't been general meetings in a lot of places, though. But no, we have not done that.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Then the second question is, when you referred to in the presentation, or when it was referred to that the subway stations that the Q104 will connect to will be accessible in the near future, what are the projected timeframes for those accessibility improvements to be completed?
Yeah, I'm not sure we have the exact answer for that tonight. I will say that if it's something that's of interest, we can see if that has been, just started to be discussed and planned out and get back to you all. I think we coordinate in terms of what is considered or categorized, I guess I should say, as accessible, in progress, or planned to be accessible, in the same way that we put out that information on our MTA website.
But near future can mean more than a decade, theoretically, right?
These are in the plan, and we will get back to you with dates.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Absolutely.
Before let's hand it to Paul Crickler.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to do.
Chair of our Roosevelt Island Committee, and has been intimately involved in these transportation issues.
Thank you, gents. Thank you very much for the presentation. I want to follow up on that point. I think my perception is it's very important that those stations be accessible. My perception is a lot of people who are in wheelchairs or need help otherwise get off this island by taking the bus to get to a station that's accessible. I know Judy's got her hand up. She'll know better than I will. So Judy will tell you all if that's true or not. And also, I just want to say for the record, if the fact that you're going to keep going to Kohler, I think is really important. So thank you for that. That's it. And I want to see what Judy says about that, please.
Go ahead.
Well,
Go
are we
ahead,
going
Judy.
to Judy, or
before
are we going to Jordan,
Well-
who's a member of the public, first?
Well, let's have Judy follow up for Paul on that. Go ahead, Judy.
Okay, good evening. Thank you. I think I have an intimate relationship with the MTA at this point. The Q104, first of all, I would say more than half the riders are staff, employees, and visitors of Kohler Long-Term Care, which is the 500-bed nursing home and rehab on Roosevelt Island. So they are a major portion of the riders. The Q102 takes them across the bridge, they go to Queens Plaza, and they can connect to everything in the world. This and the stations there are wheelchair accessible, but a lot of them take the other buses and go out to places like Jamaica, Flushing, etc. To put them on a route going up Broadway with non-accessible stations. Also, Broadway is an elevated station. I'm not sure if I think 46th also. 46th Street is elevated stations, and with no elevators, it's a joke because it'll take years. And if you get to a station, because you have to use the subway, it's really dangerous for a person in a wheelchair. I know the staff and employees of Kohler are very worried because many of them come to work very early in the morning, late at night, and Queens Plaza is the hub. That's where they can get their transportation. Many of them live in the Bronx. They live all over New York. And just to put them on a train that goes out to Broadway, which is useless, and to end up on Northern Boulevard, 10 or 15 blocks from Queens Plaza, is ridiculous. I mean, the 102 buses run for almost a century. I remember riding it in the 60s from Queens Plaza. There is nothing the matter with the 102 route. Please just leave it alone. You can shorten it. There's no reason it has to go to the south end of the island. But one question is, will your drivers, they always take a break at the south route, at the south end of Roosevelt Island. They take a 5-minute break or something. Where would the route end? Would it end at the tram station or a block beyond where they can make a U-turn? Because they'd have to park their buses someplace when they do take the break. But that's not his major concern, is that the staff, the residents of this island need the 102. It wasn't broken. There's no reason to repair it. Just leave it and we will be very happy. And we will not annoy you. We just want the 102 retained. I'm very emotional about this because I'm very involved with Kohler. And I don't think that their staff and their residents deserve to have an unreliable connection on buses. Thank you very much.
Let's go to Jordan Stein. Now can we unmute him?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about raising my hand too soon. I'm actually also speaking about Kohler and the 102, so I'll keep it short because we just heard most of what I was going to say. I'm just a little concerned about it moving away from Queens Plaza, where there's, a lot of transportation hubs, it's ADA accessible, all that stuff, to the other subway stops. And I mean, obviously, it's good to go to a subway stop. That's going to be good for most people. But, especially on Roosevelt Island, it's an older community. I am a little concerned that a disproportionate amount of those people will have trouble with non-handicap accessible subway stations. Thank you so much for giving me time, and let's get the next person.
Thank you, Jordan. Do we have any other members of the public that want to comment on
I'll
that?
just remind everybody
Did
that
you
you
wanna-
can go to the
Oh, sorry.
reactions icon on your device and press the raise hand buttons under that menu. And I'm sorry for talking over.
Yeah, we have, well, Jill, I guess we have Jill Eisner. Can we unmute Jill?
Hi there. Also a question with regard to the route, because you said you've done so much outreach in Queens. From my understanding, and I am not an expert on Queens, this new route will skirt the Queensbridge houses. Now, it seems to me that people in public housing rely upon the buses even more so than people that have cars and other options. It's a surprising that the route would be allowed to do that, and that the people, the representatives in Queens would support that, because I think that goes to, our nursing staff, and not just the nursing staff, but the other workers, the janitors and the cleaners and those people who rely upon this type of service to get to and from Roosevelt Island. And I think Judy mentioned on weird hour shifts. What type of feedback have you heard?
Yeah, I think there's a couple questions now, so maybe it's helpful for us to answer these before we move on, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Of course. Yeah, so I think what we've heard so far, I think, is very helpful, and especially if there's the specific, as Andre started out with, specific start and end destination. I'm hearing a lot about Kohler Center, so I'm hearing that as the specific start, and then Queens Plaza as the end destination. As far as the question about the if the bus will be doing, like in this proposal, what the Q102 does today for laying over, yes, it would. So that means it would only be providing the service on the northern part of the island in one direction, but then starting and then going into Manhattan. And then, sorry, there are multiple questions back to back. So I will try to address them. But as far as what we're seeing from the ridership end, because I think Judith brought up some helpful feedback that helps supplement the ridership that we're seeing. So we see that on today's existing Q102, 60% of the trips coming to or from Roosevelt Island would still be served by the Q104. So I think we can drill down into the Kohler Center stop and then, review that in the next version. And then of the remaining trips, about 10% of the Roosevelt Island trips travel to or from Queens Plaza. So we are seeing that only about 10% of those trips are going to Queens Plaza and the Queensboro Plaza subway stations, but also helpful. And then for the last question, it was about the housing and then the adjustment, say if we were to pair Roosevelt Island service with the Q104 instead of having the Q102. So the options on 21st Street would be the Q69 or the B62. And I think something that we should really incorporate as a talking point, because it always comes up, and then this is the perfect time to add it in, but it might just be helpful to say at the beginning. And especially since folks, I'm sure in this CB are very familiar with the Bronx redesign, similar to in the Bronx redesign for the Queens project or Queens redesign. We've said that as part of this project, as well as if we are the ones who are, say introducing a transfer to what used to be a trip that you made on one seat, that we'd be working with our MetroCard and Omni partners, that would be programmed in. So I think that's also an important thing to flag here, when especially the 21st Street question jogged that thought in my mind. So yeah, sorry, I just wanted to answer those really quickly, and then we can keep going.
Okay, thank you. We'll get next to Mr. Samsung, if you will identify yourself. You're on a small screen, so you couldn't actually be a Samsung.
Sorry, my name is David Kupferberg. I'm the Vice President of Bus Advocacy at Passengers United. Having the Broadway station, having the Q104 connect to the Roosevelt Island people to the Broadway station will not be ADA compliant in the near future. This is unacceptable. The people of Roosevelt Island want their connection to Queensboro Plaza Station, soon to be ADA compliant, and Queens Plaza Station, currently ADA compliant, maintained. An extension of the proposed Q105 to Roosevelt Island is a perfect fit. My Q105 would serve Roosevelt Island, ADA compliant subway stations, and better serve Western Queens. Riders for the Queens Center Mall could use the subway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see here. Next, we have, I think, Stephen Silverstein. Stephen? Can we unmute him, please?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Suggesting 21st Street bus lines as a transfer mechanism to Queensboro Plaza is not a workable solution for a couple of reasons. One, connection time to move from bus to bus and wait for the next bus, and also cost. You only get one free transfer in the MTA system, so you're gonna double the commuting costs for whoever is taking that route, as you suggest. And that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you.
Apologies if I wasn't clear. Oh, sorry, Kate might be saying the same thing. I was just saying apologies if I wasn't clear. That I hear you on R1 free transfer. This is as a part of this project, similar to like what we did in the Bronx. If we were introducing another leg to your trip, then this would not be counting as your free transfer. This is a programmed in transfer.
Okay. Next is Lydia. If you could identify yourself, fully identify yourself, please. Unmute Lydia.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Lydia Tong. I'm on the board of the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation. Let's see. I'm actually speaking up because I know many families on Roosevelt Island with children. They use the 102 to get their children to different programs in Queens. And I'm pretty sure from my memory, I am no longer in that demographic. I no longer have little children, but I'm pretty sure they really would like to go to Queensboro Plaza and Queens Plaza. So I'm raising my voice in advocating for the families with little children who are bringing their kids to whatever programs they are. Queensbridge, Queensboro Plaza and Queens Plaza are better connectors for most of Queens. So that's.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I think, oh, sorry, just really quick. If there's any specific, like I'm hearing the transfer point, but if like, I'm guessing people are going to those specific subway stations and trying to get somewhere else. So I totally understand we're in a meeting right now, but if post meeting, if people can either go to our project page and give us that specific information or reach out, I think that's what's most helpful here, to make sure that we're addressing the trip need, even if it's, you know, like I said, it's helpful to know where you're trying to go versus the station that you're used to going to now. So thank you.
Next is Matt Waldman, who's a Roosevelt Island Committee public member. But can we unmute Matt? Go ahead, Matt.
Hi, Matt Waldman, resident of Roosevelt Island community. Just a couple of comments. One is currently it's showing the northbound Q104 is stopping at the library, which is there would only be two northbound stops, the Roosevelt Island station and the library, and I think the Main Street School. Currently the Q102 also does serve 546, which is where the location of the senior center of Roosevelt Island. So I think it is a more central location to have the Q104 stop at 546, as opposed to the library. It's a more central location. There's also covered. It's covered, so riders are protected from the weather. And there's also seating adjacent to the stop. So it would be really helpful to have that stop, keep that stop for the Q104. And second is it looks like the frequency for the Q104 is pretty much about the same as the current Q102 service. Weekends, it's 30-minute service at all times. Middle of the day and evenings, I think it's about like 30-minute service. And the MTA only provides the Q102 or 104 and the F train service to Roosevelt Island. So if something happens to the F train, as we see now, you know, with the F train project for several months, or if the F train is rerouted on the weekend, it really causes issues for people getting on and off Roosevelt Island. So it would really be helpful to have a reliable and frequent bus service that runs more than every 30 minutes. So that would be great. Thank you.
Can I jump in quickly?
Thanks for this.
Thank you, Matt. Go.
Thanks. I was
ahead.
going to say thanks for the specific feedback on the stop. But yeah, sorry, go for it, Paul.
Go ahead, Matt.
I just want to say exactly what Matt said, both things, moving the stop away from the library, a bit further up towards the senior center, and also about the frequency of the service. Well, you know, Matt said it really well, but I support that.
So I guess the question I would have to the MTA folks we've heard from the people on Roosevelt Island that the 102 has been functioning quite well. And I guess what's the basic justification for, changing and going to the 104, which makes stops, which is going to be making stops at areas that at some point may be accessible but aren't now and have other problems because of if they're outside stations, as people have said. And I don't think I heard an overall justification for it, unless I missed something.
Yeah, that was my question also, because to me, this seems as if Roosevelt Island was sort of an afterthought, and it was linked to the Q104 out of convenience and to allow it to fit within the context of the broader Queens redesign, as opposed to how does it better serve Roosevelt Island residents and the specific destinations and trip purposes that they use the bus for currently. So I'm hoping you could comment on that, please.
Well, somebody from the MTA wants to, Peter Tyler, is it?
Yeah, Tyler, Peter works with our team with DOT, so I think he wants to chime in here, please.
We're happy to have him chime in.
Hi there. So I'm a former Astoria resident, and I think this was either the December 2019 or early 2020 outreach that the MTA did. At that time, I actually was not working with the transit development side on New York City DOT. I was working in other units, so I was totally there just as a resident. That outreach was held at the Queensbridge Housing, and this route actually came up. At the time, the Q102, I think, was being rerouted around 39th Avenue or around there. And a lot of people at that table that I was seated at were complaining that that reroute didn't serve them at all, really, because as I know a lot of you are from Manhattan, but if you're more familiar with Queens, that area on the border between Long Island City and Astoria is very industrial, has a lot of former factories of some sort, whether it's bakeries or industrial uses. So a lot of the residents of Roosevelt Island at the table that I was at were talking about how they would prefer to have something that connected to grocery stores, doctors' offices, things that they needed to get to on their day-to-day outside of work or trips to home. So more just neighborhood necessities. And so one thing that was discussed at that time was, let's get the redesign on to 39th Avenue to another more useful corridor, and bringing it onto Broadway provides that with the access to, there's a Costco at the end of the western end of Broadway. There's a number of local grocers along the Broadway corridor. There's a number of local doctor's offices, dentist offices, more neighborhood services through that central line through Astoria. And then on the southern end, you get into the Woodside area, as well as there's like a Home Depot and some more traditional, I guess, suburban strip malls when you get by the Sunnyside Yards that people were more interested in connecting to. So I just wanted to bring that historical knowledge and direct feedback that I heard at that public meeting.
Well, I guess that's what the Queens people felt, and Judy will tell us.
Well, I was at a table that specifically had Roosevelt Island neighbors, like it was neighborhoods, pretty much.
Well, maybe they didn't speak up at the time, but Judy, go ahead.
Very funny. I was at that same meeting, and it was such an utter mess of confusion and hundreds of people at tables not knowing what anything was going on. I think the MTA should just erase that meeting from their memory. What I do want to say is that Kohler is having a special meeting during the day for their residents and staff in March. They've arranged it with the MTA. We're having a prep meeting for it. The executive director has been in touch with the MTA, and I want to thank you because you've all been most cooperative in arranging a middle of the day, middle of the week meeting where the residents and staff can both meet with you and discuss the plan. And as for shopping on Broadway, there's too damn much traffic on Broadway. It would take a bus forever to get through, and it's full of construction projects. So we'll just stick with Queens Plaza and be happy with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. I don't see anyone else, and I want to ask Paul, do you think it might be helpful for the committee and the board to make a few suggestions to the MTA via a resolution or not? I'll leave it to you, obviously, since you're got the full perspective on it.
Well, I'm curious what MTA thinks about needing a resolution. Would it be helpful to you if
well, I think a reservation, if we said, let's assume we said something that we like to keep to 102, that would express our view, if it is our view, and when they go into their next look and redesign. That's all I'm saying. We don't.
If gentlemen, if I may, you are welcome to send us what you want, but we're going to treat a written email of comments just as seriously as a resolution. So every board is a little different. Follow the policies and practices that you would like, but any way you want to send us that written feedback, we're going to take it seriously, and we're going to take a good look at it. And as Judith said, we're meeting with the hospital as well in a couple weeks.
Understood, but also if we were to pass a resolution that also gets sent to all the elected officials as well, and stakeholders that will be paying specific attention to that as a community board resolution, as opposed to just the general comments. And I know that the MTA, New York City Transit, takes all comments to heart, and we always appreciate that. But I think my recommendation would be that if this group, our committee, wants to make recommendations or has a specific outcome that they wish to express via resolution, that we should do it. This is the opportunity that we have to go on the record with it.
I think the simplest one, Craig, is a resolution saying we'd like to keep the Q102 and not have it swapped for the Q104. As simple as that.
Okay.
I would suggest, and this will be spelled out, I think, in the whereases, but if there are if there's a specific connection that we want to maintain, whether it be to Queensboro, I mean, obviously by the Q102 would be to maintain Queensboro Plaza service. The other question I had, Paul, and you may have looked at this more closely than I did, just referring back to the resolution that was passed a few months back in regards to the extension of hours of the Q102 late nights to be able to serve Kohler. Does this proposal, we should probably reiterate that either way, but does this proposal address that that request that we made?
That's a great point, Craig.
In the extension of hours, I believe it does. Hours are proposed to be extended from what the current service is, but I don't have the recommendations that you're referring to.
I don't know if I can't see, the screen is too small to see the span of service that's proposed.
So existing is 6 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. Proposed is 5 a.m. to 1 a.m. 7 days a week. I can also drop a link to this on our website, which is much more visible, but that would only go to your, there you go.
What time does it stop?
And this would be as a result of being the Q104. So I just want to make that clear. The hours of service are for the Q104.
What time is the stop?
Put that link in the chat, and I'll send it out to everybody.
What are the 102 hours now that got extended? Do you know, Paul or Judy?
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I think the resolution was that we had the last stop being Kohler, like at 1 o'clock. So I'm curious, where is the stop that you said is at 1 o'clock on the island?
Judy, do you know? Judy, let's unmute Judy for a minute. She may know this.
I think the last bus gets on the island and goes to Kohler at 12:30. About then, or a little before that, because then it apparently stops at the south end and leaves the island later. But to just keep the 102 and give us the extra hour of service would be fine. And she keeps the number 102. We're very attached to 102. Maybe it's a lucky lottery number. So really, we need the service. We need the late night service because a lot of people end their workday at midnight or 11:30. And we need that last bus to get to the subway or however they're getting off the island. So the best thing would be keep the 102, shorten the route a little, and then have the last bus be at as late as it can be at 12:30 or 1 o'clock.
Yeah, 1 o'clock. They proposed one for the
proposed one. Okay, so
I just don't know if that's the last bus start time or if that's when it ends. Just want for that Kohler served at the times that we wanted to allow the workers to be able to, whether they're arriving or leaving after their shifts. I know that was
I know. I mean,
we can issue.
before we finish the resolution, I'll check with Kohler, okay? And that's the only thing I can do, is I can check with Kohler. I'm not sure, the staff there knows what time the last bus
Yeah,
comes.
and we have that, we can just reiterate the
Sure.
Right.
as well, so that's fine. And I agree, it probably makes most sense to keep this as simple as possible.
Yes.
The whereas clauses will discuss the specific concerns that the committee has in regards to the proposed Q104 service, and it will be resolved that we wish to that we oppose the replacement of the Q102 with the Q104, and we want to maintain Q102 service with the extended service hours to ensure that Kohler staff is served.
Thank you.
Read it.
And also the bus stop, the on Main Street bus stop remain at 546 Main Street.
Okay.
And also more frequent, we're going to put in the resolution, more frequent bus service.
Of course.
Rita Popper, can we unmute Rita? She wants to make a motion.
I thought the motion was made. I was going to ask to call the question.
Okay. Well, I guess Paul did sort of make a motion there. Did we get a second? There, Michelle seconds it. Okay. Why don't we call the questions? Unless anyone has an objection, I don't see anyone wanting to speak. So,
see any objections? So I'm going to lower everyone's hands.
Right. If you're for it, you don't have to do anything. If you're against it or want to abstain or not voting for cause, raise your hand. Put the raise hand.
And let me just read the roll.
Yep.
So it's myself, Chuck, Abraham, Cause, Judith, Juno, Lori, Michelle, Rebecca Dangor, Paul, and Rita. And I thought, is Matt Waldman still on? If he's a public member of the committee, right? Correct.
I believe so. Yes, and
so he should be counted as well for this vote.
And for the record, it's Judith Birdie, not Judy Schneider.
Yes.
Right.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Do you, Paul? Do you want to say something before we? Are you raising your hand? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I think there's some confusion over roles. We currently have two public members. One is Judy and one is someone called Amra Cardoso, who's not here. So as much as Matt does for the community here, he's not a public member of the committee.
Okay, we should.
My bad on that. I less research and he put that in there. So.
Okay, so I don't see anyone raising their hand, so this would be a unanimous resolution here at this point. And we thank the MTA folks, and they've been very cooperative in trying to take the community's concerns and worked with us and the Roosevelt Island Committee in trying to deal with the situation on Roosevelt Island, where many months the F train has been disrupted, and there's been a lot of supplementary things. Not everything everybody wanted, but I think it went a long way, and so we appreciate the work of the MTA, and hopefully we'll get the bus situation straightened out also.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for sticking around this long.
Right.
If only we could all be on Pacific Coast time.
Right, exactly. Well, you guys have to move to San Francisco, maybe. Okay, I guess let's see.
Thank you very much, everyone.
It's about 8:45, and we've finished with this topic. And our item 3 is a public hearing for one of our revocable consent applications to construct, maintain, and use a snow melt system at 20 East 78th Street. Is there anyone here for the application?
Do we have anyone? Andrew is the presenter.
Is this Andrew Lyon? Is he the producer, the applicant? Or
I'm representing the applicant. I'm the architect.
You're the architect. Okay, why don't you go ahead?
It's a pretty straightforward. We're working with a client who is renovating their townhome, and they want to install a DOT-approved sidewalk snow melt system. We believe it's a benefit, maintains the safety of the sidewalk in their location, and we would be doing it just in front of them. We have DOT approval, I believe. We're waiting on this final community board hearing. And I'm here to answer any questions about it. We provided the required 30 posts, 30 signposts, and here to help.
Well, let us know what kind of snow melt machine it is and how it's serviced and stuff like that, and whether you have to, have access from the building.
Sure. It's a glycol 40% propylene system. It's on a single loop. There's an access underneath the existing stairs for any service. It's serviced within their building, within their property, and they would, I believe, be responsible for that. It's how can I put it? It's within a reinforced steel mesh, and it's reinforced within the concrete slab. It's fairly standard. It's basically a radiant slab managed through their own heating and cooling system within their property.
Okay, thank you. Any members of the public want to comment? Okay, I don't see anyone. Do you, Will?
I don't. Just a reminder, go to the reactions icon on your device, press the raise hand button, or chat me if you're having problems.
Okay, I don't see anyone. Michelle, can we have you, Michelle?
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. You don't have, Andrew, you have no visuals to show the area that this is covering or how wide the house is, anything?
We certainly do. Let me share my
Oh, well,
screen.
wonderful.
Screen.
Let's
Yeah,
share, sure.
They were included in the link for the meeting. Wasn't sure if you wanted me to share.
Yeah, they're also on our agenda for anybody who would like to look at them on their own device.
So 1 second, let me share my screen. The address is 20 East 78th Street. It's a mid-block residence. You can see it, well, you can see the gate here, and we've noted that these photos are a little tight. It's this white house right here. It would be the extent, unfortunately, covered by this car in the site photo. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 12 flags in front of their home, and you can see the area noted in this location, and you can see the snow melt. It's the snow melt heated slab running here in these locations. All the existing street lights and street valves are to remain. So we would be really taking care of all the occupiable space in this location.
So is that an electrical system or a hot water system? What is it?
It's a hot water system. So it's filled with it's a glycol. I mean, it's not truly water. It's a glycol water mixture solution, as noted here.
And you said the access, let's say it breaks down. You said the access is under the stairs, but you would need to break up the sidewalk in order to repair it, would you not?
We would, that's correct. And so let me rephrase that. So all of the equipment is connected through this point, and there's its own heating loop that's brought to a mechanical room within the house. So if there was a failure in the sidewalk, they would be responsible for repairing and replacing it. That's correct.
Only if it actually broke down, you mean, right?
Can you tell how long it would take to install? You have to break up the whole sidewalk. How long is the installation? That's one question. Let me ask another one at the same time. At what temperature? What's the buildup of snow before this kicks in?
I mean, both of those questions are excellent, Michelle. I'm not the contractor, so I can't answer the means and methods question. When we've seen flags poured before doing flat work by contractors, it would be, say, maybe a day, 2 days. It's part of really pouring the flag. I want to address sort of two questions here. The first question would be, if it was to fail, really when it's encapsulated in the concrete, as you can see on the left-hand side, the concrete really protects this snow melt tubing. It's a very thin tube. And so you'd have to essentially break the concrete slab, forcefully shatter it to address the PVC piping. The second question was, what's the temperature that it starts to work at? I'll have to confirm. I don't have that information in front of me, but I believe it's actually set at freezing, so 32 Fahrenheit. And it's set inside the house at the temperature. There's not a temperature sensor within this zone.
So that means it would be 32 inside the house if that's where the sensor is. You need it outside.
Well, true. What I'm saying is when there's at 32 degrees, right? I believe there's sensors on their property. The snow melt system would kick on.
I only ask that because there's some concern that if they don't come on soon enough and long enough, that it can freeze a thin layer. You know what I mean? And actually create an icy condition.
Understood.
So that's the reason. Well,
Yep.
I traditionally have no problem with these as long as they are easily accessible. So I know to address the tubing, you have to break the concrete. But if you have the electrical connection accessible and whatever the water feed or the fluid feed is accessible, then if any of those went wrong, then you wouldn't have to break up the sidewalk. Is that correct assumption?
That's correct. So if we have an issue evacuating the glycol from the system, and I'm unfortunate, of course, the plan that I hoped we don't have here because this is just focused on the DOT scope. In the mechanic room, we have an outlet that we can pump out the glycol.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
I think Koss had his hand up before. Koss, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, many of these have been installed with no problem, so I would like to move to approve and call the question.
Well, you need a second here first. All right, Rita seconds. And you can't call the question. Somebody else has to do that. So is there, Michelle's calling the question. Okay, any objections?
Rita had her hand up. I don't know if Rita was saying something.
Oh, Rita, did you want to say anything or do you want to call the question?
Nope.
Okay, she didn't. Okay, so if you're in favor, you don't have to do anything. If you want to vote no, abstaining, or not voting for cause, please raise your hand.
And let me just read the roll again. Some people may have dropped off. Myself, Chuck, Abraham, Kaz, Juno, Lori, Michelle, Paul, Rebecca, Rita.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So that passes unanimously. And the next item is the update from DOT. I don't know if anyone's, oh, there's Colleen.
Hey,
right
here,
on
waiting
schedule.
patiently.
Right on schedule. Yes, at
I know, how are
8:40, 8:55, right on schedule, yes.
I know. Just a quick update. As many of you know, we announced the dining out program last week, the permanent program. And the rules and regulations is on our DOT's website. And I just wanted to, share with you some of the aspects of the program. For example, the setup area must be located within the restaurant's frontage. The maximum length is 40 feet. And the maximum width for a cafe is 8 feet. However, NYC DOT may require less than 8 feet to address safety issues. With the permanent program, as you know, the outdoor dining structures, the sheds are going to be removed, and it's going to be movable tables and chairs. And what I'm told is that for the outdoor dining structure, as long as their setup is in compliance and registered under the temporary program, they can continue to operate their old setup till August 3rd. If they apply by August 3rd, they can continue to operate till a decision is made on their application. Once their application is approved, they will need to bring their setup into compliance with the new rules. If they don't apply for the new program during the 5-month grace period, they will need to remove their setup by August 3rd. So that's what it is. So, Will, I'm going to forward you the link so that you can share with the committee members of the new rules that were posted on DOT's website. And I know the community board would like us to come and give a presentation on this. So we're working on on this, and I'll keep you posted on the timeline of when we'll come to the community board.
Okay. Klaus had his hand up.
Hi, Kaz.
What's up, Klaus?
Yeah, my usual question. So all these structures on the street are going to be coming down no later than August. What about all the illegal sidewalk structures? When are they coming down?
You know what, Kaz? It's going to be the same time as well. It's the same time frame we're looking at, August 3rd.
So
Yeah.
any outside or any enclosed structure that was grandfathered, I assume that somebody has a list of what was grandfathered?
Yes, we do. We have a list of what's been grandfathered. So those that are not. So it's overall the entire program that we're going to be looking at in moving forward. So it's ones that's on the sidewalk and that's in the roadway as well, the curb lane.
And who's paying for the removal? Is DOT, DSNY, or the owner?
We've been asking the property owners to remove them. And of course, if there's a hardship, the DOT and DSNY will do that for them.
Okay, so August 4th, we'll see nothing on the sidewalk.
Well, yes, fingers crossed.
You'll be out there. You'll be out there to let us know, I'm sure. Klaus.
Yep, I will.
I know you will.
Yeah.
Especially some of these that there's 3 or 4 feet clearance. I mean, they should have been down years ago.
Yeah, well, the rules are much more strict now compared under the temporary program.
Good. Thanks, Colleen.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Abraham hasn't spoken tonight and is our chair, obviously, of Street Life and knows something about all these things.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Abraham.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just to follow up to causes, and because I had the same question about the sidewalk ones, are you able to share the list of the establishments and venues that you have in our community district that you consider grandfathered versus which should come down?
You know what? I'm going to find out if we're permitted to share that list, because I'm sure it's a lot. And if we were to do that, we would probably have to share the list with other community boards. So
okay, I mean, I think, yeah, it's just, we just want to make sure, I'd like to just make sure I have the same understanding as to which ones should come down and which ones shouldn't.
Yeah, sure. I can find that for you.
And also particularly for my committee, for like if any of the venues come up before us, to make sure to flag this as a topic of conversation.
Yeah, that's an excellent question for you to have that information before they come before the committee.
Yeah, great.
Totally
Thank
get that.
you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Abraham. I think that's very helpful. Michelle? Michelle?
Okay. Thank you. So thanks, Colleen. So a couple of questions. When you say grandfathered, do you mean grandfathered forever or grandfathered until that August date?
It's grandfathered forever. These are locations that were grandfathered from the inception, from the beginning.
So they will have no further review?
Well, they're grandfathered. I mean, if I don't know if they would have any further review. I'll find out, Michelle, and I'll let you know.
Okay, because they can be grandfathered and be non-compliant.
All right, wait. Can I just make sure we're on the?
These are, yeah, you better get it right.
Are we talking about sidewalk cafes that are grandfathered, or roadway dining structures?
Sidewalk cafes.
So those that were already grandfathered in the old program and fully compliant before the pandemic are the ones that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
No, but the roadway ones are none of the roadway ones are grandfathered.
No,
right?
those are not grandfathered. Those are new under the temporary program. We're talking about sidewalk cafes that are already grandfathered.
This is existing.
All right, so let me just get back. So the grandfathered, you're talking about sheds on the sidewalk, structured.
Those are not grandfathered, Michelle. Michelle, they're not grandfathered. None of those
enclosed sidewalk cafes.
Like the old diners used to have.
Okay, well, an enclosed sidewalk cafe, if it's enclosed with a ceiling and 2 sides,
right?
I understand what I call that a shed. Anyway, what you're saying is those that have been grandfathered and remain compliant will not be removed or forced or asked to remove. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I just have a couple of other questions. Have you increased your enforcement team, the number of people in your enforcement team?
From what I'm told, yes, we have, and we at the moment we're having mandatory training for the new program.
Okay. All right. And will the roadway dining be the way I saw the early pictures, which is basically no structure, but like a table and chairs, but not affixed?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. My last question, which you'll know I'll ask about, is 89th and 2nd. Do you have any update on that?
You know what, Michelle, I reported that to DOB, and let me follow up with DOB on their inspection, because that particular structure is attached to the building.
Yeah, they built a complete attachment.
Yeah.
But I don't know that with zoning that you can just add on to a building. It has a base, it has a floor, it has a ceiling, has an enclosure. It's a complete addition to an exterior of a building. I can't imagine that you can do that without permits. I mean,
yeah.
And the narrowing of the sidewalk, if you've seen it, they've narrowed the sidewalk, obviously, quite a bit.
And eventually that will come down to Michelle.
Yeah, I mean, that was under the temporary program, right, Colleen?
Yeah,
That was under, they did that under the temporary program.
That's an attachment to the building, Chuck. That's not under any program.
No, but it wasn't there before, that 89th and 2nd. It wasn't there before the temporary program.
No,
Michelle, Michelle, from my understanding, they did this under the temporary program. So eventually that will have to be removed. It'll have to come down.
All I can tell you is they built it. They started and ended it. When did I first report it to you? Is it under 6 months?
Yeah, they built it even though they did not get, certification from DOT to do so.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't call that as under that program. This is a
wait a minute,
permanent
Michelle.
structure.
Look, I go by that a lot, and that was not there before the temporary program went into effect. That's number one.
They didn't build it under the guidelines.
Michelle,
of the temporary
no,
program.
listen to me.
Let Colleen answer that.
Well, listen what I think, and then you can. I think that it wasn't there before under the regular program, and it wasn't a compliant structure, so it has to be removed. You can't. There's no way they can justify keeping.
Well, I'm agreeing with you, Chuck. That's what we're trying to make happen.
Chuck is absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we don't disagree. That's exactly what I've been reporting. I'm just following up on if and when this will happen. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Why don't we go to, if no further questions there, why don't we go to if we have any old or new business, and Colleen's here to answer questions if people have that. Is there anything anyone wants to bring up at this point? Okay. I don't see anything. All right. Well, it's 9:05, and Michelle, you would like to make a motion to adjourn? Michelle and Abraham seconds. So without objection, we are adjourned, and we thank everyone, and we will be ready for the full board meeting. And we're not having a land use meeting, my understanding.
Yes, I will not be at the full board meeting.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
You're on your own, Chuck.
All right. I'll soldier on. Take care, everybody.